They all came for the
They
awards.
ate and left.
They all came for the awards.
Well, they did. You did a good job. Okay. Go ahead, Kevin.
All right. Good morning, Chair Finley, Commissioners, and Director Melcher. For the record, my name is Kevin Herkamp. I am the Restoration Enhancement Program Coordinator and Salmon Trout Enhancement Program Coordinator with the department. With me today is Tom Vanderplatt, a member of our STEP Advisory Committee, and today I'll be presenting two ARNI-related issues for your consideration and action, and Tom will be presenting the STEP Annual Report. Before we get to the issues, I'd like to provide a quick overview of the ODFW Restoration Enhancement Program, also known as ARNI, and how investments from it have made fishing better in Oregon over the past 30 years. About 90% of the ARNI program funding comes from surcharges on recreational angling license, and about 10% comes from commercial salmon permits and poundage fees. When funding projects, the ARNI board ensures that they benefit the sources of revenue in the same proportion as the revenue is received. Statute outlines several categories of activities that ARNI funds can be used for. Those include aquatic inventories, including research and monitoring, and improvements to fish habitat, educating the public, and providing access for anglers, construction and repairs of fish passage and screening structures, and the maintenance of fish hatcheries, equipment used to release fish, and investments in new hatchery equipment and technology. As you can see, the Restoration Enhancement Program supports a wide variety of projects types, all centered on improving fishing. Per statutory definition, the restoration side of the account is more about maintaining and repairing existing hatchery and passage facilities. The enhancement side includes any new facilities or other activities that improve fish populations or provide the public access to those fisheries. The ARNI board is charged with recommending a balance between these two sides of the account. As you can see, each biennium the ARNI board awards about $4.5 to $5 million on projects. Since 1989, the program has invested over $60 million across the state. Looking at the last 10 years, the ARNI program spent over $22 million on projects, on all project types, and has leveraged a 2-to-1 ratio of return on investment, supporting nearly $74 million in projects, many of which would not have moved forward if not for the investment by ARNI. I will now move into the first issue. This is the need to appoint a sport fishing and a commercial troll representative to the ARNI board. ARNI board members are appointed by the commission, and each board member has the opportunity to serve 2 4-year terms. Per statute, our current board members include 3 commercial salmon fishery representatives, 3 sport fishing representatives, and 1 representative for public at large. Raymond Rowe's first term as troll representative will end September 1st, and Yancey Lynn's first term as sport fishing representative will end October 13th. ODFW advertised the vacancy through various media sources and organizations. We received 5 applications from across the state for the sport fishing position and 1 application for the troll position. Candidates were evaluated based on the criteria you see on the screen. Application reviews were conducted by 5 staff members, and based on this review, 2 sport candidates and 1 commercial candidate rose to the top. Based on the review, staff recommend that Raymond Rowe from Pacific City be reappointed as a troll representative and Yancey Lynn from Bend be reappointed as a sport fishing representative. I would like to point out that as outlined in the packet, we did identify an alternate for sport fishing, and that was Larry Robinson from Coquille. That concludes my presentation for issue 1. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have before we move on to the second issue.
Is Anna Freitas here?
He's got another issue too.
Okay, go ahead with your other issue.
Okay. At their meeting in Astoria on May 10th, the ARNI board recommended 6 projects for funding across the state. The 6 recommended projects, as shown on the screen, totaled nearly $770,000 for cycle 2. An example of the projects before you today is a Rockfish Survey. Rocky reef fish stocks have considerable value to Oregon recreational, charter, and commercial nearshore fisheries. Specifically, nearshore semi-pelagic rockfish, such as the black, blue, and deacon rockfish, comprise more than half of the total catch and value annually. Despite their value to local fisheries, current stock assessments for these species lack adequate fishery-independent data to assess the abundance of these stocks. This project will be the first fishery-independent survey of Oregon's nearshore reefs utilizing both hydroacoustic and suspended camera equipment. This survey technique covers ground more effectively and rapidly than other fishery-independent methods and utilizes chartered commercial crab boats. The first survey will begin in September of 2019 and will be used to develop a population estimate for the 2021 black rockfish stock assessment. This project will improve the stock assessment process, increase management certainty in setting catch limits and regulations. The recommendations total for Cycle 2 is about $770,000. If these projects are approved, about $530,000 will remain for the biennium. R&E staff recommend the Commission approve the recommended projects presented to you today. And that concludes my presentation for this issue, and I'd be happy to answer any questions before we move on to the STEP annual report.
Okay, one public witness, Ana Freitas. Okay. Commissioners, questions? Okay. We'll just consider she's not here. All right, do I hear a motion?
I move to reappoint Nancy Lynn to a 4-year term as the sport fishing representative and Ray Monroe to a 4-year term as the troll representative on the Fish Restoration and Enhancement Board.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner.
Spellbrink. By
Where's my
Commissioner
note?
Spellbrink.
Yeah, no, I'm looking for my notes. Commissioner Spellbrink and seconded by Commissioner Buckmaster. Any more discussion, questions, comments? All right, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, it passes unanimously by the 5 commissioners present. Thank you.
We also have the projects.
Yeah, you have the projects.
So, Mr. Chair, I move approval of the recommendations of the Fish Restoration Enhancement Board.
Okay?
Second.
Okay. Been moved by Commissioner Labhart and seconded by Commissioner Spellbrink. Any more thoughts or discussions, questions? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously.
Thank you. With that, I will pass the presentation on to Tom Vanderplatt.
Thank you, Kevin. Chair Finley, commissioners, welcome new commissioners. Tom Vanderplatt, I am the staff representative for the Lower Willamette. I've been serving there about 6.5 years. I apparently drew the short straw for doing the presentation today, but I'm glad to do it. This is one of the most exciting things and programs within the agency that I see and get the opportunity to participate in. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of that. I left my 3-hour PowerPoint at home, so you'll be able to go through. STAC is just agency advisors. We're appointed by the governor. There's 13 of us. We represent STEP volunteers. I'm going to have you run that. Go ahead. We're to advise the department on what volunteers need and what the program, the Salmon Trout Enhancement Program does, and I'll go into more detail on that part of it, and really consolidate, what we're hearing from our volunteers, which is a valuable resource as part of that. As far as the areas we cover for salmon trout, hatcheries, education, angler access, habitat restoration, monitoring, all those things that happen because the department needs help and uses that help in a very important and valuable way. People are donating their time, which from my perspective is the most valuable thing people can have, is their time, because we're all limited on that for sure. If you go to the next one, this is 37 partnerships. This is a whole bunch of people that are passionate about fishing, that you can't pay them to be able to do all the work that the department needs to do. And so that's an important partnership. Our STEP bios and our district staffs are active all the time with these folks. So this is just 37 organizations, but guess what? I bet you there's another 37 out there between watershed councils and others that we see as that part of it. A couple of them I'll highlight. One is there's a hatchery at Astoria. There's a hatchery at Warrenton. Those are school-based programs. I've been to them, watched those kids, and it's amazing. Also, you go to the South Coast, watch all the fish those people are producing. Fall Chinook. I've been to the Stuck-Eye Anglers fin clipping probably for 15 or 20 years. I've thrown carcasses in tributary streams with Ron Wren. I've done all those kind of activities, and those volunteers and those organizations are valuable to the resource as far as that goes. Go to the next one. So let's talk numbers. Equivalent to 39 full-time employees. Now you can appreciate we only have 10 step biologists. Those 39 full-time equivalents, those aren't all the same employee. That's a myriad of people with experience and backgrounds, but it equates to a value. It equates to a $2 million equivalent of a resource. So from my perspective, this is the best leverage program within ODF&W. Where else do you find that kind of resource available to you? And they're doing it all for free. Sometimes you get food, sometimes you get donuts, sometimes you get a stinky, ugly fish that you get to throw in the creek. But you're doing something for fish, and I think that's important. Next is teaching our future. I see on the wall there, it talks about future generations. Guess what? We need more tackle boxes than we need X boxes, let me tell you. We need more anglers. And so this is where the kids get out, and we're teaching kids learning things. If you've never delivered eggs on Eggs to Fry, you're missing the biggest opportunity of your life. It's like being Santa Claus. You walk in there with 500 eggs and a wet towel, and let me tell you, you have 30 kids looking at you just on the edge of their seat, wanting to look at those eggs and see those eggs go into that tank. If you ever get the chance to do that, do it. It's an amazing program. As you can tell, I'm a big advocate for it. I've done it for years. I love going to the classroom. My daughter is a third grade teacher in Hillsboro. Guess what? She has a tank. She'll have a tank this fall. So that's a big one. Aquatic education. Our volunteers get out there, teach those kids how to catch fish. That's one of the most important things that can happen. Get them away from the screen, get them out on a riverbank or a lake or wherever to teach them education. Aquatic education, you can see the number of participants there, 66,300. The step bios are taking those trout, those trailers that have the equipment in them, and making it happen, and making those kids have the opportunity to catch their first trout. And you know, many times, the adult ends up catching a trout too. And so the parents get activated to do that. Fishing's a little more of a complex sport than typically basketball and soccer and those kind of things. So it takes a little bit more effort. Other things they do, a place to fish and a fish to catch, that's really important. Stocking, lakes and rivers and those kind of things are, I've done the backpack stocking of Battle Lake with Robert Bradley. I've helped build docks and do those kind of things. Our step volunteers account for 60 to 80% of the fall Chinook that come out of the South Coast. Those fish that come out of Whiskey Creek or Rhodes Pond or the Gardner Hatchery or any of those volunteers are passionate and always there. So next we've got where and how we live. We got monitoring programs. That picture there I know is Rich Heap, who's on our R&E board. He's collecting scales off an old dead carcass. Doesn't that sound like a fun activity? But it's really important for the science of understanding what's happening on the ground. So those kind of things. Habitat restoration, planting trees, making sure that fish have a place to hide and live. We do nutrient enrichment with carcasses. I've been out with Ron Wren with 6 totes of dead, stinking carcasses. It smells horrible, but you know when you throw that fish in the stream, you know you're doing something for fish. And if you ask Ron, he'll tell you the story about taking the Astoria kids that are 3rd and 5th graders and them getting covered with slime and stinking up the bus, and the bus driver wasn't happy. But guess what? They knew what they were doing as far as reseeding the stream with nutrients. So it's those kind of examples that you just kind of have to appreciate as part of that process. And this is staff that you don't have to hire. These are people that just show up, want to participate, want to do something for fish. Next on, let's go on to the next thing. Return on investment. You're all businessmen. You're all aware of the dollar, aware of the funds that the department has for these kind of programs. Look at that return on investment. If I was running a business like that, I think I'd be pretty happy. That's all the volunteer value of all the hours. And I think, from watching this program over the last 20 years, that's underreported. I think there's more volunteer hours than we report in that part of it. You can appreciate it's pretty boring to do that. But with 10.5 FTE, that's our step biologists and some other program staff, you get 39 FTEs. You're also, that's the gateway to the department. Your step volunteers and your step are your key advocates for that program and key advocates for the department. And guess what? They're the ones that are going to tell you when you're messing up because they have a relationship with their step biologist. John Weber was here. I've watched John work. I've watched the programs he's run. I've watched all the step biologists. They do a fantastic job. As staff members, we want to make sure they focus on that. We want to make sure we put in place the areas that they are for sure focused on that. And you can appreciate trying to get people out to throw carcasses or do fish eggs to fry, or they're busy folks. And that's important as part of that goes. Looking to the future, we've got increased capacity to increase impact. Look at the leveraging we can do with even just one person as part of that. The potential of the volunteers. Oregon, as you know, likes to volunteer, likes to be out in nature, likes to participate in that process. There's an opportunity here that I think we're missing. I'll talk more about that in a minute. The step biologists have only so much time and only so much effort, but all the other groups are helping recruit and maintain those. Now, the challenge is the future. The future is, how do we make sure we support the volunteers as part of that process? I don't like showing up to a project that I don't know what the instructions are, or I don't know what the need is. That's where the step bio does their work and really can add value as part of that. We need more capacity. We need more volunteers. And I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity to volunteer, please do it. It's an enjoyable, and there's opportunities all over the state to do it. Challenges, look at that population growth. I live in Beaverton. I see it every day. So in Washington County, I know that we add 33 new people to the county every day. Guess where 11 of them come from? And I'm part of the problem because I have 5 grandchildren. That's where they're coming from. They're coming from the hospital. They're brand new residents of Oregon. And guess what? We got to teach them about how valuable this resource is and how valuable the capacity to be able to do that. So notice the population continues to grow. Our step staff numbers are not rising to the equivalent to the population. And we have a good business sense for that part of it. Keep going. Challenges. We want the department to be the best place to volunteer. We want to make it easy. We want to be able to communicate with them. Kevin and his team is working on areas where we can, as you know, if it doesn't happen on this, it doesn't happen anywhere. This is where people are starting to connect. My doggone iPhone. My 3-year-old grandson knows how to work an iPhone. Can you believe that? So that's where we have to reach out and be part of the technology as part of that process. We've already got dedicated volunteers. Our problem is they're aging out. We've got to get the younger generation to understand and participate in that process. So also we have to diversify. We see changes in our community that are happening at various levels, various lifestyles, various cultures. We got to be able to adapt to those kind of things. That's part of that. So how do we address those? We got to educate the public. We got to make sure they understand there's fish in their backyard stream. Up in Washington County, I work for an organization that we make sure they know that there's fish in their backyard stream. Because a lot of people think, oh, that's just a ditch. No, it can actually have cutthroat trout in it. It can actually have other fish in it that are valuable to the resource and valuable to the system. How do we improve fishing access? You know, it's tougher and tougher. When I was a kid, I could go down to the local stream and catch a fish. I didn't have to look at the fishing regulations. Have you seen the fishing regulations lately? Guess what? I have nephews and grandkids. I have to worry about them knowing what the right rules are and as part of that. So we got to make those systems easier. And through our STEP program and our volunteer program, we should be able to educate folks on that. As it says on the slide, STEP focuses on the people. The people are often important as part of that process. Also, the departments focus on the resource, but they go hand in hand. So we got to make sure we take care of both. That's what I'm advocating for. So what do you need from me? Or what do I need from you? Why am I here today? Why do I need your help? Our volunteers continue to age out. There's a gap there. What I need is a better way to support those volunteers and grow them and give them something they can do of value. So I'm looking and asking for, one, there's a volunteer management program that's being developed. We want to make sure STAC is actively involved in that. We needed a seat at the table at the EBAC, which we've had, and I appreciate that as far as the budget process. And then I think finally, also we need more STEP resources. I think that's the part that we've come to ask every year as part of that. I still can't understand the business case of why not, but I understand there's lots of challenges and lots of issues. But I think from STAC standpoint, we're trying to build the system to help the department make sure that we still have that resource available to that program, and we still have the support that we need as part of that process. Finally, we get more STEP resources. I think you see the leverage and we see a bright future for the future of our fish and then also of our fisheries. All this stuff doesn't happen without people helping fish. And so that's why I'm passionate about STEP and STAC, is because that's really the fun part. When I go to the fin clipping at Nestucca Anglers and see 80 to 100 people stand there, 5-year-old kids clipping fish, fall Chinook, that are going to go into the Nestucca, which on one trip 2 years ago, we caught 10 fish over the season. 4 of those came from Nestucca Anglers Pond. We could tell by the clipping. So those are the kind of things and examples where STAC and STEP are a key program for the department. And I just want to appreciate Kevin. Kevin works hard at trying to keep the 13 people that are on STAC. And these are leaders. These are people that know what their volunteers are telling them, organizing volunteers, are on the ground with the people that are doing the work. So appreciate your time today. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to give you the overview. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Comments? Questions? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Exhibit C. D. Exhibit D.
And Mr. Chair, Mike Govan has had a death in the family, so he is not here today. Bruce McIntosh, Dr. McIntosh, will be standing in for Mike.
Dr. McIntosh. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Finley, fellow commissioners, Director Melcher. For the record, Bruce McIntosh, Deputy Fish Chief here in headquarters, and much to Chair Finley's chagrin, I am not Mike Govan, but I'll do my best to keep you entertained.
Actually, I'm excited.
Well, thanks. As Director Melcher noted, Mike had a death in the family earlier in the week and is away. But before I dive into this presentation, and I appreciate Tom's comments about the challenge associated with angling regs, but in my 12 years in this job, and I think Chair Finley, Commissioner Buckmaster have been through this rodeo a few times. The fishing regs and the process have changed radically in the last 10 years. And you would have typically, for the new commissioners, shown up and had a binder associated with the angling regs, which was as big as the rest of the other binder. A really complicated public process with, frankly, really poor outcomes for the public and, I think, frankly, the agency in terms of those relationships. We changed that fundamentally about 5 years ago to where we put a real effort into simplifying these regs and making them readable, legible, consistent, easy to follow. As a former legislator used to joke, to go fishing in Oregon required a fishing rod in one hand and a lawyer in the other. I think we've made great progress on that, and it really is Mike Govan's leadership that has gotten us there. We continue in that same thread today. Like I said, for the new commissioners, this will be an annual event, renewing and modifying the regulations, but the rate at which we've been doing that has really slowed down for a whole variety of reasons. Today before you, we have our proposal for the 2020 angling regulations. There are a number of topics for your consideration today. We'll speak a little bit about the public involvement to date, and then there are really two issues we are asking you to vote on. The first focuses on modifying the OARs, date changes, and then the regulation proposals themselves. And then the second one is a standalone looking at modifying license requirements when using temporary structures. And then, of course, there's time for public testimony and correspondence. The public involvement process, the commission materials were posted to the OWF website prior to the commission meeting. Of course, there's opportunity for public comment through the commission meeting, and as affirmed today, those new rules would take place on January 1, 2020. There's also a process that happens in the background in that we have tried to kind of retrain our publics to work with our district biologists on what regulations might need to be changed, and really the district staff are the gatekeepers on what comes forward to these processes. And I'll show some examples here in a minute of how that has been working. As I said, issue 1 focuses on the Oregon administrative rules. It will ultimately change all the references in the OARs concerning 2019 angling regs to 2020, and then make any other necessary date changes in the regulation package, such as when the free fishing weekend occurs and those types of things. The guidelines for developing staff proposals to modify angling regs were set by the commission. Gosh, I'm going to say this was 10, 15 years ago. But the guidelines were essentially around where there might be critical conservation needs, housekeeping, simplifying regs, and then correcting errors of omission, inadvertent restrictions, regulation changes directed by the adoption of new plans, and then hopefully newer expanded non-controversial angling opportunities. Before you today, there are 24 proposed changes. I would submit that that is probably the smallest package in a generation. So that's we view that as that the process is working. The proposed rule language is in your package, again in attachment 4. First, I'm going to start with the statewide proposals in the package, and then I will go through them by zone in the order they appear in the angling regs. This proposal on the statewide side I'm particularly proud of. It's asking to modify the Oregon Disabilities Hunting and Fishing Permit associated with clamming for disabled clammers. This was some members of the public came forward to us and our staff. We worked with the members of the public. We worked with our coastal staff along with Oregon State Police and came up with a modification to this that I believe has everyone happy. The former rules, the disabled clammer had to be within 100 feet of their assistant. And I think what folks found was that did not really give them the latitude to fully take advantage of that activity. So again, we worked with OSP and our staff and came up with increasing the distance to 100 yards or within the sight of the assistants. And everyone is on board with that. Moving through the angling zones, I'll first focus on the northwest zone, first zone in the book. There are really only 3 changes being proposed in the northwest zone. They are there to provide consistency or opportunity and ultimately to streamline the current regs. They're all focused in the Halem River and the Bay. A change in the season associated with Chinook salmon. This really simplifies the regs and provides additional opportunity. And then a change in the hatchery steelhead season, again providing consistency with the rest of the tributaries in the Nehalem. In the southwest zone, really only one reg right in Commissioner Wall's backyard, focused on the Elk River. This again helps provide clarity and consistency with the coastal multi-species plan and only allows hatchery Chinook to be harvested in January and March. So a consistency in seasons and then clarification around when the focus can be on wild and hatchery fish and when the focus can be on hatchery fish alone. Now moving to the Willamette zone. The key change in this zone is an effort to make the 2-rod validation for licenses permanent in the Willamette River and its tributaries and the Sandy River. The 2-rod has been used in the Willamette for the past few years under a temporary rule. This would make it a permanent rule. We are also proposing to change this to a 2-rod permanent for the first time in the Sandy River. Our staff has worked with the public on this, and there's broad support for this. Really, the design here is, 2 rods are another way to enhance the ability to get at abundant hatchery fish, which are in these systems. It also provides, frankly, a steady source of revenue to the department, while we retain our capacity as conservation needs warrant of issuing temporary rules, rescinding that. But given how it's worked in the last few years, it seemed like it was the time to make this a permanent rule. Moving to the central zone, there are only a few proposed changes. One is to remove the limit on bass in Subtle Lake. Recently, it's really been sad in the last couple of years. We had our first bull trout found in Subtle Lake in like 40 years, and not too far past that, we found out that someone had introduced smallmouth bass. So this takes those limits off. It'll help protect both native kokanee and trout and the salmon steelhead that we're working on reintroducing in that system. Moving to the northeast zone, in the Grand Ronde River, we're proposing to remove the size and bag limit on smallmouth bass. Again, this simplifies the regulation, should provide some conservation benefit, and ultimately it provides consistency with rules between Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. In the southeast zone, the good news is there were no proposals submitted, so nothing to consider there. And then in the snake zone, staff is proposing to allow the use of 2 rods in the Snake River above Brownlee Reservoir. This is a body that is dominated by warm water fish, very popular with the angling public, and this will ultimately expand their opportunities in that zone itself. And then moving to the Columbia, we have a proposal in here to allow the use of barbed hooks in the Columbia River zone. This was adopted by temporary rule at the June 6th commission meeting by the commission. It brings us in concurrence with Washington, so we now have it proposed as a permanent rule come January 1. And then finally, in the marine zone, no proposals for that as well. So with issue 1, the staff recommendation is that the commission accept the 2020 angling reg proposals as shown in attachment 4. We also recommend that the commission authorize staff to make the necessary text or formatting changes to correct typographical or grammatical errors, inadvertent inconsistencies, and update information regarding the electronic licensing system as needed. Moving to issue 2, this is built off of a temporary rule that you approved in April 2019, earlier in this year. We had a temporary modification of licensing requirements associated with temporary fishing structures. So think of when you go to the sportsman show, There's a fit pond there. We're handing out rods to kids to catch a trout and take it home. The Congressional Sportsman's Caucus has an event on the Capitol lawn. We need to change this so that we don't have to require kids to have a license, or anyone to have a license at those kind of events, because they're really there to promote an angling opportunity. So with that, that completes my presentation. Open to questions, and I know there's at least some public comment.
Okay, we have one person for public testimony, so just stay right there. David Moskowitz. So charging for you the time you went over when you were up here before.
You owe us.
You get 10 seconds.
Good. Excellent.
All right.
That would, Chair Finley, members of the commission, my name is David Moskowitz with Conservation Angler. There's some good rules here. There's some that we think need to be questioned. But I want to make a point about the public process here. Bruce was harkening back to the way it used to be, whether it be rooms full of citizens angry about barbless or fly fishing or bait or whatever it be. It was a very demanding process on the staff. What we have here, though, is the exact opposite. No public hearings, no news release. This is the first public hearing. The Barbless Hook rule has never been given public airing by Washington or Oregon. Right now is the first time there's been an opportunity to speak in public about it. So the materials prepared by Mr. Govin talk about that you have to answer some things with the Secretary of State. And one of the questions is about advisory committees. And the question is, was an advisory rule committee consulted? The answer is no. If not, why not? And the department's response does not really answer the question. It says that the commission directs the department to develop sport fishing regulations annually. 2020 regulations proposal were developed to address changes identified by department staff, OSP, and OSP. Proposals are available to sport fishing groups and the general public through department staff and public. Now, it is true what Bruce said, that these rules were published with the Secretary of State on the 22nd. There was notice in one of the commission agendas at the bottom. It's not exactly, did it meet the letter of the law? Probably. Is it good public interaction with the interested public? And the fact that maybe I'm the only person here in the building to testify on this, it doesn't meet that. It doesn't help engage you with your constituents. And these issues, the Barbless Hook issue it itself is a very big issue that hasn't had a chance to be aired. The two rod validations in the Willamette and the Sandy. You have listed fish there. One of the two rod validations takes the Willamette from the mouth up to the falls, and it's year round. The other doesn't go into effect May 1st or May 31st, something like that. You still have listed wild winter steelhead, perhaps trying to make their way out after spawning. You have the spring Chinook are coming later and later, heading up to the Sandy Am, the Mackenzie, and the Willamette. And you're having two rods. And I think that the purpose of that is to provide more opportunity. It likely translates into a higher encounter rate, and we wonder whether ODFW has modeled the encounter rate to comply with any incidental takes permits they have on the impact of angling on listed fish. So those are questions we have about these, and I think I'm over already, so I'll stop there. I think I'm happy to try to answer questions, but I think there's a number of questions that need to be made of these rules. It's not just a simple housekeeping thing. Some of these are major. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I am happy to take questions if you have any.
Okay, questions? Did we model the encounter rates?
Chair Findlay, members of the commission, we've done this in prior efforts associated with the creel work that we continuously do in the Willamette, looking at those impact rates. It's something like 5 to 10%. Chris Kern would know the exact details of that, but
He's not here.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yep. So that we have a very active creel associated with that fishery. We've looked at this at the last several years to look at that encounter rate, and it's like a 5 to 10% change. We're well within our impacts associated with federal authorization.
Okay. Commissioner Labarge.
So I guess a question for you, Bruce. You mentioned, and this is in regards to Dave's comments, that we've changed the process and that we've allowed the public to converse with biologists at the local office. And is that, if I'm paraphrasing here, so if I'm not correct what you said, please correct me. But you said we're getting better feedback from there by actually participating at the local level. Then we discuss it with state police and others and staff, and then we come up with a proposal. That is your perception of how we've done that public process. Is that a fair statement? Okay.
Chair Finley, Commissioner Labhart, yes, that's how I would view it, and I think David made my case for me in that we don't have any public here. They're interacting, they propose things through this process through the year when we send out the call in the early winter to our staff to start developing proposals. They're listening to those folks. I mean, they would overrun us in the past. I think you're seeing that the angling public is by and large satisfied with where those regulations exist.
Commissioner Buckmaster.
I would like you just to reconfirm what I thought I heard you say, that the 2-rod endorsement on the Willamette, making it permanent, was to access abundant hatchery fish, to do a better job of accessing abundant hatchery fish that needed to be caught. Is that what I heard?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Buckmaster, absolutely.
Thank you.
What species are those? Chinook?
Spring Chinook.
All right. Commissioner Labarge.
Well, I said one other question. So did you mention, Bruce, that staff is proposing to remove the regulation on salmon steelhead angling would be allowed 24 hours a day during the retention period? I'm not sure I heard that. Did you mention that?
I did not mention it.
Okay.
The presentation really covers, kind of a suite of things out there versus each one. But
Okay.
yes, in the above the Bonneville Pool to the Idaho or the Washington line, we've removed the 24-hour angling there. That was a Washington rule that we were concurrent with. They have now changed that, and now this brings us into concurrence with that.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
I have a couple questions, and I think probably first for you, Bruce, but Dave, you may have something to say on these too. You talked about the guidelines that were put together years ago, and those are still guiding the process. If those guidelines now included, for instance, climate change, would there have, and I don't know how you can guess this, but would that likely have generated some proposals? In this, we have a couple conservation proposals, and they're there to get rid of fish we don't want to get rid of, we don't want, so we want to have more competition, and that makes a lot of sense. But if climate change impacts and looking at them had been on that list of guidelines, would we have more proposals that look at big picture how to conserve the stocks?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Wall, great question. There was nothing like 2015 and the drought and extreme conditions we experienced then to serve as a major wake-up call to the agency, and I think the state and region as a whole on this front. We implemented hoot owl regulations as temporary rules in that year, among a number of things. Our preference is to manage those in real time, because every year is different. You look at this year, I don't know what normal is anymore, but it's clearly a much cooler year. So I really don't, to answer your question, I don't think we would see much associated with that. There would be, I'm sure Mr. Moskowitz would propose some of the things that he's talked about, but in the scheme of things, I think our feedback from the public has been they like how we're managing those things in real time.
And one question just on that, when you just mentioned the angling public, do you look at a broader public for response and for comments and proposals on these? Or are you talking to more people than the angling public?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Wall, our staff is out in the public eye all the time, all kinds of groups, and they take feedback on these things. We aren't explicitly out there advertising the reg changes in those things, but our folks, whenever these come up from a staff proposal, we're talking to our publics on that, and that includes the conservation groups.
One more question on those. Back to the 2-rod issue. It makes perfect sense to me what you're trying to do to get more of the hatchery fish captured. Are we also, though, increasing the catch of wild?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Wall, there is no catch of the wild. There is encounter with them for sure. And as I noted, it's like a 5 to 10% increase in encounter rates associated with that. But again, any incidental mortality associated with that is well within the allowances we have through NOAA fisheries. And I can't emphasize enough, this is a highly managed fishery. I mean, it's right up there with the Columbia.
You're talking about the lower Willamette River?
Lower Willamette, yep.
Okay, so I'm going to read you something from Liz Hamilton. We estimated the hooking mortality of spring Chinook salmon that were caught and released to determine whether selective fishing on hatchery Chinook salmon would reduce harvest mortality of wild fish in a sports fishery in the lower Willamette River. What we're talking about, right? Hooking mortality in the fishery was estimated from hooking mortality rates for each of 5 anatomical locations: jaw, tongue, eye, gills, and esophagus, stomach, and from the frequency of these anatomical locations in the sport fishery: jaw 81.5%, tongue, eye 0.4 gill, so-and-so. Mortality rates by anatomical location were estimated from recaptures of 869 tagged fish that were experimentally angled and 825 tag controls that were trapped in nearby fishway. Anatomical hook locations in the lower Willamette River sport fishery were determined with creel surveys. We estimated hooking mortality rates of 12.2% for wild Chinook salmon. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so 12.2% mortality rate, 2 poles of wild fish. So what's our trade-off there?
Well, our encounter would be another 5 to 10% on top of that 12. It's not a doubling.
Why isn't it a doubling with 2 rods?
Because doesn't guarantee you're going to catch twice as many fish.
Well, I see that. All right. So
And-
this
and-
gets me to barbless hooks. If you've got a 12.2% for wild Chinook salmon, then why are we going to barbless hooks? I mean barbed hooks. With inexperienced anglers
Sure.
who are going to maybe even have a higher mortality rate than 12.2%.
Well, Chair Finley, you can see in the summary of that research that ODFW conducted, that work was conducted as we were entering back into fisheries 20 years ago. I think Kurt may have been involved in that stuff at the time. It was all designed to get at the nuances of what this fishery was going to do to both the retention of hatchery fish and wild fish. So that is all built into that authorization, and as we model the 2-rod piece, we get to those mortality numbers that gives NOAA the confidence, along with the creel, that we're staying where we're at. In terms of the barbed and the barbless question, again, you can see in that very work that the fundamental issue is around where they're hooked, not what they're hooked with.
And the handling by inexperienced anglers removing a barbed hook.
Yep.
And that's what I can't seem to get penetrated, that inexperienced anglers are brutal on these fish. I've seen them step on in a boat to get the pliers on them. So,
I guess, Mr. Chair, I would just point out that research that you're referring to there was actually conducted with barbed hooks. I mean, that is a barbed hook mortality rate.
yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Buckmaster?
The reason I asked the previous question, Bruce, on the two rod was not to lead into the barbed hook debate, which I think is a solid debate, and I agree with David that that's a debate that needs a full house to debate, and the fact that it does have social implications, maybe in addition to biologic, is valid, and as a commissioner, I would say, so what? It's certainly something we need to consider. My problem with two rods, based on your affirmation that it is to suck up additional hatchery fish that need to be caught, is that we have shut down an entire industry in the main stem, the lower main stem for spring chinook, commercial fleet, on some sort of originally a pretense of conservation, which has been shown to be untrue. And now we're talking about how to divvy up, how to get rid of extra Willamette fish that have historically been caught, have significant catches in the commercial fleet, and were a large part of their annual paycheck. And now we're saying, well, we've got them in the Willamette, let's give these guys two rods, because we need to get rid of these fish. I will not support that. I think if we've got fish to be rid of, it's time to start looking at one of the many reasons to review and change the policy. Take care of both user groups first, then see what we have left. And if we need two rods to catch, to use fewer fishermen to catch more, sport fishermen to catch more fish, then I think commissioners ought to seriously consider it. But it's premature while we've got a group of citizens sitting on the beach. Thanks.
Mr. Labhart?
Clarification question. So on the Columbia River zone, I learned yesterday about the consistency that we're trying to achieve between the two states. So it's mentioned here with the proposed rule changes that we would be consistent with Washington. What about Idaho? I know we don't have a consistency agreement with them, do we? Director, do we have a consistency agreement?
Well, Chair Finley and Commissioner Labhart, we have a reciprocity agreement with Idaho for boundary waters. We don't have any Columbia River Compact like we do with Washington, because we don't have any commercial fisheries that we co-manage with the state of Idaho, but we do have a reciprocity agreement.
Okay. So the Snake and up there, do they have, are we consistent with them on terms of the main tributaries that go into the Columbia with them regarding this proposed change?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Labhart, I do not know the answer to that, but I know the gentlemen that do. Maybe Kurt does.
And Chair Finley and Commissioner Labhart,
David, we're in our deliberative stuff, so I'd like you to take a seat.
I was hoping I could respond to Commissioner Wall's question.
Well, wait, I didn't get an answer to my question first.
There was,
Hang on.
So, Director?
We have concurrent regulations with the state of Idaho.
Okay.
So I think there may have been some slight differences in a few warm water species over the years, but at least as it relates to salmon and steelhead in our boundary waters, we have concurrent regulations, which is what we're striving for with Washington, both in terms of recreational regulations, but also in terms of commercial regulations.
And this would continue that, the proposals?
That's
in the
correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then I would just add that I don't want to belabor the point, and you all can, obviously do what you want to do, but with regard to the two rod option. We're not giving anything to anyone. They have to actually buy that. So they're paying, you know, it gives people the option of purchasing an additional licensing product that then allows them to use the second rod. They aren't, no one is compelled to do it. Many people won't or don't, but a few people do. And so we're not actually giving them, I mean, they are paying, that's my point. And it does generate a significant amount of revenue, and our fish program, we need revenue on the fish side.
Go ahead, Buck.
Go ahead.
That is absolutely, maybe true, it is true. We do charge for a 2-rod endorsement, absolutely. But if your argument is that we need the money and we're charging for a 2-rod endorsement, and consequently that justifies keeping a historic community of fishermen on the beach because of that, if that's your point, then I reject it. If it's not your point, then it's interesting but irrelevant to my argument.
Okay,
Chair Finley, may I make one response? I know I'm pushing the envelope here.
okay,
and I
then,
promise.
then you have to take your seat.
Yeah, I'm out of here.
All right.
In the Willamette, you have listed fish that are not doing well. Your duty is not just the present generations, but future generations. And the message that anglers having 2 rods each in a boat or on the bank in the Willamette with listed fish that aren't doing well is the wrong message to send, regardless of the benefit of the present generation. And I appreciate your.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, further discussion, commissioners.
Would you like a motion? Or does
Sure.
somebody else have?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I would move that we add climate change impacts to the guidelines for looking at the sport fishing regulations, that we further require barbless hooks in the Columbia, and that we do not include the 2-rod allowance.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second this to advance the discussion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's have some more discussion now. Commissioner Lab.
So just a clarification, Mary, so are you saying on the Columbia River Zone, page 3, that you agree with the wording that's there? Is that what I'm hearing?
That I would what?
You agree with that wording?
No.
Page 3, you do not.
I would
Which one?
say
Staff is proposing that wording.
must use barbless. This removes the requirement to, I would like to not allow barbed.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understood what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So then, if you were an Oregon fisherman, you could be cited for having barbed hooks, and if you're a Washington fisherman, you don't have to have barbed hooks, because, I mean, part of the rule was to bring us in consistency with the state of Washington, is that right?
Chair Finley and Commissioner Spellbrink, we are talking about the 2020 regulations here, and when we do not have, in the event that we do not have concurrent regulations with the state of Washington, whether that be a recreational regulation or a commercial regulation, then the regulation for the state in which you are fishing is the regulation that applies. So in this case, if you were fishing, you are an Oregon angler fishing on the Washington side of the river, and Washington, assuming, kept their barbless voluntary rule, the Oregon angler on the Washington side of the river could still use barbed hooks. Neither the Oregon nor the Washington anglers would be able to use barbed hooks on the Oregon side of the river. So then it just becomes an issue for our enforcement folks. It would be our enforcement folks that have to deal with it. Washington wouldn't have to because they have more liberal regulations. So our enforcement folks would have to basically enforce the state line, which is roughly the middle of the ship channel with a few changes historically it's the old ship channel.
Commissioner Buckmaster.
I don't have the language in front of me. Certainly, what, did we change Barb and Barbless in the Willamette?
Yeah.
And,
2 years ago, I believe.
and it is what currently? And,
In the Willamette?
yes,
In the Willamette, barbless are voluntary.
okay.
No, I couldn't quite hear that. What?
Barbless are voluntary in the Willamette.
As they are, I would point out, in almost all other Oregon waters around the state, with a few, very few exceptions.
So, I have no problem when we say no, when my colleague says no two-rod. I think the two-rod, and I am against the two-rod in the Willamette. I have no problem with the two-rod above Brownlee for warm water fish. And the more of those we catch, that's fine. So I have, just say no two-rod, I would be specific, I would hope that we could be specific. If we say barbless, you know where I stand, but I won't be here. But I do believe that this is something that does require people from both sides to be in the room to make that decision. I think we could make it in the Willamette without affecting our concurrency issue with Washington. Now, maybe to spur on the debate and come back and visit it, because it will spur on the debate. So so I would ask my colleague to consider addressing the two-rod in the Willamette, addressing the barbless hooks, making them not voluntary, but put them in place in the Willamette. And that way we can begin that argument. And how you would phrase, I'm curious how you're going to phrase the climate change impact, and fully support that we need to address it. But I don't know how you want to address it yet.
And I don't know the answer to exactly what the language should be, but it would be pretty easy to create one of the guidelines on that list that we look at, that we consider climate change impacts when we look at the regulations, and what would address those impacts.
Okay, so we have your first motion, and are you willing to amend that motion to address Commissioner Buckmaster's suggestions?
In which case barbless would be mandatory in the Willamette and voluntary in
In
the.
the concurrent waters of the Columbia.
I would, because, and only because, it will, this discussion will get open and we'll come back to it and we will have a public discussion of it, yes. But
All
I
right.
will stay on this one, yeah.
And you said that in your motion about that we should consider the impact of, like, you wrote it down, would you read it again?
Which part?
That's climate change.
That we add climate change impacts to the guidelines for looking at the sport fishing regulations. So that we consider climate change impacts when we're looking at what needs to change in those regulations.
All right, any further discussion?
Well, Mr. Chair, I wonder if we could bite off these one at a time, rather than trying to lump them all into one motion. Because I have some discussion I'd like to further have about the Columbia River Zone. And could we do one at a time? Can we do the Willamette? You're concerned about the two rod and the Willamette, because now we're adding in barbless and non-barbless on the Willamette, and was that one of the proposals?
No.
Yeah. So now we're adding a rule, so it's getting confusing now to me.
I would just add, Mr. Chair, that I want to make sure we're clear on with this Willamette proposal. Are we talking about the entire basin? Well, I mean, that encompasses a whole lot of regulations in the regulation booklet. There's not just one little thing that says for the Willamette. There's literally, numerous locations in the Willamette that we're. So I want to make sure we're crystal clear on what it is the
Yeah,
expectation is.
I'm back to where I don't have a problem with Commissioner Buckmaster's concern about the two rods. I agree with Mr. Moskowitz's comments. The message that we're sending is not something I would support. So I agree with the 2-rod, but then all of a sudden now we're talking barbless and non-barbless on the Willamette. And so if we could just do like the 2-rod, have that discussion and vote on it, and then do another one if you want to, but then I'd like to at least have the discussion on the Columbia too, so.
Fine.
Well, how we piece it out and doing that, I don't want to speak for Commissioner Wall, but the idea that we would add something, and the rules are open, so we can do that.
Just-
So that's, even if it wasn't in the recommendation, we are not prescribed from doing it. That's one. Secondly, if we talk about the lower Willamette, basically it's what falls down, is where we have the serious spring Chinook fishery, or the major salmon fishery, and make that small section barbless. My understanding is, and what I would support is, having something in rule that is strong enough and will affect enough people to make sure that the issue comes back before you all with a full room and a full discussion and all the accompanying pros and cons that you're going to receive. The lower Willamette would do that, and without doing it on the whole basin and having to change all the rules going up. So,
But couldn't we also do what we did earlier in concurrence with directing the department to come back with that discussion rather than putting in a rule? Because we're putting in a rule potentially without hearing from other folks. So if we give staff direction to say, we want to have that discussion, we want to hear all sides of the issue, rather than putting in place a rule without having any public comment on it, on the Willamette, on the lower Willamette. I mean, that's like, whoa. Nobody's here to talk about that.
you could do it that way, certainly. But you realize that we've done the same thing for the last, now the 3rd year of getting into the warm water issues and cold water refugia on the Columbia, where we keep doing it in temporary rule and with staff and all that, and yet, and what we end up doing is, next year we do the same thing. We have an older and an older Moskowitz in front of us saying, come on, it's that time of year again, can we do something? And the commission saying, yeah, we need to do something, and going back to it. So it needs to be strong enough to I believe you need to make something strong enough that it, rather than just a request, that it will come before you.
But, but if we would have had the potential for going to barbless hooks on the Willamette in this today, I guarantee there have been more public testimony here today. There have been a lot more people here talking about it. So I think the public's, a lot of fishing public's going to feel blindsided by this if we do that today.
Is there a way to make an announcement that this gets put on the agenda to come back for a discussion at a absolute decided upon date, either your next meeting or the meeting after that, so they know that that rule is going to be coming back? And I apologize, I ought to just stay out of it because it's your issue and you can press it just fine without me.
No, the idea is to have a discussion just like we're having. I think it's been a very good discussion, and this is what we're supposed to do. And Bob, I think, you raise a good point about who's not in here because they didn't have notice that there was going to be a significant change in how they may fish.
Yep, well said.
But Bruce has an equal valid point that I've seen for 8 years. And that is, we say we're concerned, and then it slides. And,
I just, well, I fished that Willamette fishery quite a bit in the past. Kind of quit because of the sea lions. Now I may be able to go, maybe be able to go back and fish again pretty soon. But basically, most of your mortality, I believe, on spring Chinook is fish that have swallowed the hook because they're good biters. They'll come up, especially guys fishing divers and stuff like that. They'll come up and they'll swallow the hook. And that hook, it doesn't matter if that fish or if that hook has a barb on it or not. You got to cut the leader. The only safe way to get rid of that fish, you get it, you bring them up, and you cut the leader as fast as possible.
yeah.
Most of the lip hooked stuff, again, it's handling of the fish. I really think we need to have education, angler education on handling of the fish, because that's where I think most of the mortality takes place with the fish. It's probably, that's more important than even the barbless hooks on the Willamette system.
Mr. Chair.
What do you want to do with your motion, Commissioner?
Here's what I would like to do, or what I think we should do at this point, because it's late and we're starting to go in circles, I think, a little bit. It's really important what we find out, that we hear from the public on this one. My intent was to stick with what was in the rule, address what was in the rules, and make barbless on the Columbia mandatory. And I'd like to still consider that. It's fine with me to wait on the Willamette, but I would like somehow to talk about it so that we actually have people here talking about it. And I do think both public involvement and addressing these things that are harming fish are critical. So I would make the part about barbless just Columbia in this motion, so that we.
So you withdraw your previous motion?
My intent when I made that motion was to deal with what was in the rules, which is Columbia. And so I would like it to just be Columbia, that we would, my
So let's
motion
do
would be to
this.
say they're
Let's-
not allowed, that barbed hooks are not allowed in the
But
Columbia.
for clarity, let's withdraw your previous motion and have Commissioner Buckmaster agree, and then it'll be off the table. And the
Okay.
notes will reflect that you withdrew your motion and the second agreed, and then you can make a new motion.
Okay,
Okay?
I agree. I will withdraw my second
Okay.
to her withdrawn motion.
So now we have,
clean slate.
yeah, clean slate.
Then I'm going to take the advice from Commissioner Labhart, and my first motion is, if I could, is to add consideration of climate change impacts to the guidelines for looking at the sport fishing rules.
Okay. We have a second?
Second?
Okay. So it's been moved by Commissioner Wall and seconded by no.
Commissioner,
Was it you, Bob?
I seconded.
I couldn't see who was doing it.
I seconded it.
Okay, by
Sorry.
Commissioner Labhart. Okay. So any more discussion on that, Mary?
Do we need wording?
Well, yeah. Read the,
If there's no more discussion, what I would suggest is that you use the draft motion language, and then at the end, you say, accept that. And then you have your two pieces. Change
Okay.
the guidance.
okay,
I will
good
come.
point. You still haven't done the Columbia.
We haven't done the
Yeah,
Columbia.
that would end up approving the two rod and the Columbia, which there's definitely discussion on that, I think.
So
We've
you're
got
trying to break this into
Pieces.
separate motions?
Pieces.
Yes.
Can you break your discussion into separate pieces?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Then we'll just have a list of accept that at the end, so keep discussion going.
So the first.
And then we'll deal with the final motion. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, let me just poll. How many are opposed to the two rod on the Willamette? So we have 4 out of 5. How many are opposed to barbless or barbed hooks on the Columbia?
I've got a comment. I am opposed to barbed hooks on Columbia. but I also was supportive of giving our director full authority to make sure that our rules were concurrent between Washington and Oregon. I find it, I'm in a quandary. If I vote for this, I'm voting for something that is, either causes him to go against the vote if he follows the first instruction, or if he follows this one.
Follows subsequent, yeah.
Yeah.
Legally.
So, as much as I want the argument, I'm going to have to vote no.
Well, maybe Washington would change their mind. They wouldn't, it wouldn't be concurrence. Gives them the opportunity to revisit it.
Well, could we do the two-rod thing and then have the discussion about barbless? Could we do that as a motion and at least get that out of the way? Because it doesn't appear that we have any controversy there. Oh, well, maybe one vote, but,
We have one.
okay.
Well, there is a motion before us, it's on the
Yes, there
table.
is.
So
And the second.
I can call the question if you're all agreeable about the two-rod.
On the climate, okay, not the climate change, we've already agreed.
We just said we were going to do a total
Yeah.
with exceptions.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so our council is down there
Shaking
with
her
a
head.
consternation look on her face.
Yeah.
So we know we're agreeing on the two-rod. We have 4-1 on that. I'm going to,
Can I make another statement that might help you? So the reason that I don't support the proposal is exactly, I think the state police, if I was looking at them in the back of the room and saying, we're gonna have this mixed thing across the river, we're talking about difficult to enforce. We're gonna be in what I believe is, if Washington stays the course, we're gonna be non-concurrent with them. And I was gonna propose maybe we could be a voluntary rather than it's this or this.
well, that's
So
where we are now.
Then we would have some kind of a compromise here that would maybe get us to yes.
Well, these are
Voluntary is where we are.
effective in 2020.
We're talking 2020.
Yeah.
So this is effective what date?
January 1, 2021.
2020.
So if we vote for Barbless starting 1/1/20, 2020, then we have time. We can still stay concurrent. We have 3 meetings of Washington, or 3 or 4 meetings of the PERC group to discuss it. It sends a clear message that we're serious. Then I'll be the third vote
Or we could
for the
stay,
20.
or we could stay with what we are now and then have that discussion
We
too.
could, but I want to send the message. I mean, my vote is that I want to send the message now, and then leave you in a pile. So,
Okay, so we have preliminary indications from the commissioners. We have 3 issues, right? Okay, so let's go back to, we still want to do this in the form of an exception?
That is my recommendation. It is the clearest for the record. It gets
All right.
all that, and then you're just.
So we'd be approving the packet as submitted, except as,
Each one of the issues that you've just discussed. So you still, I think, have the third one left.
So I move to amend OAR 635-011-0104 as proposed by staff in attachment 3, except that we add consideration of climate change impacts to the guidelines for looking at sport fishing regulations, and except that we require barbless in the Columbia River, and except that we do not agree to two-rod in the Willamette. Did that cover it?
Not, so what about the, are you authorizing staff to update necessary calendar dates?
yes.
Yes. Everything.
Yep, it needs to be read.
Am I looking at,
Did you do it?
there are 2 draft motions here, sorry.
The
The second one's for issue 2.
Okay.
Pardon
The
me?
second one's for issue 2, which we haven't discussed yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was, so the top one is issue
Got it.
number 1, draft motion. I thought I had heard you begin to say that one, so
Okay,
my,
so we,
to make it easier on you, so you do not have to say that all.
Good.
Yeah. You, all of the draft motion that's there, and then you can do your accept that you have on your notes there.
I move the draft motion as at the top of page 4, except for the, right? Am I looking at the right one now?
Can we just do one accept at a time, though? I mean, and say,
Yeah, because
We're gonna vote
I
on
support
one
2
at a
out of the 3.
that's what,
So I'm proposing that
I
you
don't
would say
support the
all
third.
of that.
You want me to say
Just
it?
say all of it. You don't need to, and then at the very end, you say accept
Okay.
that, and then you read your agreement.
Do I need to read this into the record right now?
Yes.
Okay.
So can I ask council a question before she makes a motion?
Mhm.
So it's gonna be all or none with this motion.
Yes.
So there's at least 2 of us, I think, that aren't gonna support all of those. We support 2 out of the 3. So I'm gonna have to vote no on everything because I can't support one of them.
Then I would suggest you have your discussion now to get,
Yeah,
I was wondering if we could vote on each
I
one
agree.
individually.
Yeah, could we vote on each one
well,
individually?
couldn't we leave the motion the same, but it's gonna either carry, it's gonna be carry anyway, but at least you would make your protest, right?
I don't know if it's gonna carry or not. I'm assuming it probably will. Probably will carry. But I don't know. I don't know
All
what
right.
the vote's gonna be.
So,
Would you like 3 votes? I can read
yeah,
the.
we probably gonna have to have 3 votes.
You ready for the first one? I move to amend OAR Chapter 635, Divisions 011, 013, 014, 016, 017, 018, 019, 021, 023, and 039 as proposed by staff in Attachment 3. And I move to adopt modifications to regulations proposed by staff in Attachment 4. And I authorize staff to update necessary calendar dates and make formatting changes to correct spelling and or grammar errors, address inadvertent inconsistencies, and improve readability and update information regarding the electronic licensing system as needed, except
Let's do climate change.
that I accept that we add consideration of climate change impacts to guidelines for looking at sport fishing regulations.
I don't think that works. Does it?
so it works, when you get to the end of this, I will see if it totally works, but it only works under one scenario at the end. But that one, the guidance is not an aspect of rules, so you can add that to your next element unless someone does not agree with guiding the department to do that, because that is not technically a rule, so that cannot be controversial or otherwise.
You're heading the guidance.
But if we vote on this,
We're approving everything.
we're approving everything,
Correct.
then how do you go back and make your, make any changes?
Yep, that's exactly right.
So we have to do,
We have to do,
This is like
we have
good
to vote
advice.
on amendments only, without the whole thing, if we're doing it 3-piece, right? And actually we only have to do it 2, because there are only 2 that change rules, correct?
There's only 2 that are gonna change rules, yes, so you
So-
can add one in.
So one is, I would amend the proposed rules for the 2-rod endorsement, and then we would get a second and vote on that amendment. Then you would make the motion to do the barbless hook as an amendment. We would vote on that, and then we come back, since the first one does not require a rule change, we can do it all with what we've all agreed to on the
Climate change.
climate change, plus the amendments as already voted on. That's correct, right?
That is correct. I mean, you can either argue over the 2 issues and get to an agreement and put it in a single motion. I mean, either way, you have got to get to an agreement on
Yep.
each one of those pieces.
It was the desire of
Yep.
the colleagues to be able to vote on them separately.
That's fair.
so what does it have to read right now in order to achieve this? I've heard too many things to be anything but modeling.
Let's just put a motion on the table as to whether, which, you want your barbless hooks? I would say a motion on the table to eliminate the staff proposed changes related to barbless hooks on the Columbia. And make that decision amongst the commission, and
Yeah.
that will guide how we say the next motion.
Okay.
Does that supersede then the authority we've given to the director to be concurrent with Washington?
So now this is 2020, and he has
January.
that concurrence for 19.
Oh, okay.
He's got time.
Yeah.
Do you need that entire original part of the rule
Yeah.
read again?
No, I think what you're doing right now is to say, you know, I make a motion to amend the proposal made by staff related to barbless hooks on the Columbia. I'd like to modify that aspect of the rule to have barbless hooks only on the Columbia River.
I move that we change away from the staff recommendation on requiring barbless hooks in the Columbia, and that we away from requiring barbed, and agree to require barbless in the Columbia.
Second.
Okay. Let's just call the question since we've discussed this. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye or raising your hand, I think would be better. Okay. All opposed? Okay, so it carries 3-2. Yeses were Finley, Buckmaster, and Wall.
I further move that we change away from the staff recommendation on two-rod in the Willamette, and that we not allow two-rod there.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on this one?
Again, having participated in that fishery, I almost think the two-rod thing is more an allocation issue, because anyone that's been down there, you know the wall of hooks that the spring chinook has to swim through. So it's just like who can get their hook in front of the biter first, you know. So I mean, I guess I would be opposed to that, mainly because we're going to lose the revenue that comes from that license, and I doubt if it personally make the extra % difference. And you know, when you get a biter to swim through that crowd of hooks, he's going to bite.
Yeah, okay. Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Same thing, 3-2,
No.
No,
4-1.
just one, I think.
4-1? Oh, yeah, you're right, my mistake, sorry. All right,
Yeah, 5 fingers, come on, there's no excuse.
okay. Finley, Wall, Buckmaster, and Labbard. 4. We get 4-2. And 1 against. All right, now you can read the full motion.
Well, the climate change one, did we already vote on that one?
Well, no, you didn't vote on it, so you can read that and include it in this time again, because it's guidance. And now I think you have your clear.
So you need the whole thing read again?
You have 2 options. I think the best thing for the record, now that you know how you would decide on your 2 accepts, is to read that whole thing and then accept your 3 things, your piece about the guidance, the 2 rods that you just voted on, and this other one, and then that's totally clear.
Okay.
That's fine.
I move to amend OAR Chapter 635, Divisions 011, 013, 014, 016, 017, 018, 019, 021, 023, 039, as proposed by staff in Attachment 3, and I move to adopt modifications to regulations proposed by staff in Attachment 4, and I authorize staff to update necessary calendar dates and make formatting changes to complete spelling or grammar errors, address inadvertent inconsistencies, and improve readability, and update information regarding the electronic licensing system as needed, except First, that we add consideration of climate change impacts to guidelines for looking at sport fishing regulations, except that we require barbless in the Columbia River, and lastly, that we accept that we require one rod rather than two rod in the Willamette.
Did you want to say lower Willamette?
No, this one is,
Okay.
right?
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Call the question.
Second, yes.
All in favor of the motion and as seconded, indicate by saying aye or raise your hand. Okay? Against?
Because I don't support that other one, yeah. so-
That would be reflected in the minutes.
That's reflected.
Okay.
Okay.
Got one more.
You understand that, Bruce?
Yes.
Okay, now we,
Got one more motion.
do we-
Issue 2.
okay. This one down here?
Yep.
Licensing requirements with fishing temporary, the temporary structures.
Yeah,
one.
that's true, yeah.
Okay. Do we need to discuss that, or is it pretty obvious?
Well, other than, I just have a comment.
Okay.
So I would hate to be a state policeman that's at the sportsman show and my 6-year-old grandson is out there fishing the very first time and say, I'm gonna write you a ticket because you don't have a fishing license. I mean, this
Bad
is
PR.
just crazy that we're even talking about this, but I understand we need to be legal, but I'm sure there's no state policeman that's gonna issue a citation to a 6-year-old child fishing for the very first time at the sportsman show.
You know, Commissioner Labhart, I agree with your comments. I think you should make the motion.
So, Mr. Chair, I move to amend OAR 635-011-0104 as proposed by staff in attachment 3.
Second.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Any further
I
discussion?
just have a question for Bruce on
Okay.
that. Does the language of it does this have to be approved by ODFW? Is that inherent in the rule?
Yes, Chair Finley, Commissioner Buckmaster, absolutely.
Okay, that's all.
Okay. So it's been moved by Commissioner Labhart and seconded by Commissioner Spellbrink. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, it passes unanimously by the 5 commissioners present.
With that, other business.
Okay. Let's see. Any other business, Michelle, meeting dates?
We have the resolution too.
Yeah, under other business, we have a couple things here.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, we have provided the proposed meeting dates for 2020. We're not looking for a decision here today. We just wanted to re-highlight for you all that we will want to confirm those or hear any conflicts between now and the September meeting in Gold Beach. I did distribute to you all a draft refresh of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act Commission resolution in support. We of course did that a couple years ago. New version of the act, some language change, different sponsors. So we were looking to just refresh that with you all here today under other business and open to any questions or comments you have on that draft. I think Commissioner Wall may have had one.
Do y'all understand the act and what it's meant to do? I know Commissioner Labhart has been up to his eyebrows and knows it very well. Bob, are you comfortable with the act?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Wall?
I'm comfortable with the act. I think it's great news for Oregon. I did have a question about, just to clarify, that the money can be spent on habitat protection and restoration, not just on the wildlife itself. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, that is accurate.
Commissioner Buckmaster?
I'm aware, fully supportive.
Okay. So if you're aware and fully supportive, let me see your hand. Okay, you got it.
Okay, so we'll have We'll have a draft resolution here for you to sign, Chair, or we can use your electronic signature if you'd rather us do
Use
that.
electronic,
Use
whatever you want,
electronic.
whatever's easier.
Okay, and then you have the draft letters to our 4 congressionals who were signed
signed
on.
them.
Okay, so
I signed
we've got
those.
letters from the chair to Representative Bonamici, DeFazio, Blumenauer, and Schrader, thanking them for their sponsorship, as well as a letter to Congressman Walden seeking his support as well.
Yeah, and I signed those on your behalf.
And then the last, oh, sorry, question?
No, go ahead.
Okay. And the last thing I have is not an action item, but just a follow-up on a discussion that we'd had earlier about email addresses and/or hardware options for commissioners. I just wanted to give you an update that we're still working on that. I think one of the options, but we're looking to the commission for a thumbs up or thumbs down, is that we get you all state of Oregon email addresses, as well as likely tablets with VPN access through our network. Now, the other alternative is you can use just the regular internet email access, but it is much less user-friendly. So we'll have more discussion of that perhaps in Gold Beach.
Okay, all right.
And that's all I have.
Okay, so traditionally, we have a vice chair. And I may want to go fishing sometimes in some distant place when there's a commission meeting. So we need a vice chair.
As kind of a non-biased person with my hat not in the ring, having watched a extremely competent vice chair for the last 4 years in Bob Weber, recognizing that when you are absent, Chair, that we need somebody who can hold people's feet to the fire and keep the things moving. I believe it is an unenviable job. Consequently, I would like to nominate Mary Wall as vice chair.
I would second that.
Okay. Mary, are you willing to accept that?
I am.
Okay. I am. So, let's call the question.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Can't vote for myself.
Yes, you can.
Aye.
Aye. Does it need to be a motion? No. Okay.
Okay, so it's unanimous.
So,
Thank
Mr. Chair,
you very much.
one more thing. I think I had volunteered to be the OWEB, but you were going to appoint at this meeting?
You're appointed.
Okay, thank you. The OWEB representative, I know I'm going to follow in tremendously big shoes here, but
11th, but you'll still be, but I'll be there.
yeah, I know.
Oh, this could be bad. Wait a minute. This may lose, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Do we
Yeah,
want
I'm
to
glad you
remove the
reminded me,
current
Mark.
chair?
I'm
That's
sorry?
important.
Should we remove the current?
Okay, Kurt.
Hey, cool.
No, but you know, I'd like you to think about who would like to be on the audit committee. And Commissioner Buckmaster, you can leave one thought for the rest of us. What was your thinking that you asked for? We said in the notes, when I read the minutes, that we would discuss in August the compensation fund audit.
Oh, this is a wolf compensation issue. It does not appear that the wolf, that came up in our wolf plan discussions, it does not appear to be appropriate for us, since we do not administer the compensation program. It's the Oregon Department of Agriculture, that for us to ask our internal auditor to do an audit on that program. The director was going to check to see if the Department of Agriculture had an internal auditor, but they may be one of the agencies that does not. It appears that the appropriate forum to take this request, our request, to is the governor's office, and say that we as a commission voted to advocate for a audit of the wolf compensation program. And that was given, and I think that hasn't changed. I don't know if we've made any progress, but that's really all we can do, as much as I'd like to do more.
Chair Finley, Commissioner Buckmaster, that's correct. Us conducting an audit of another agency is not, obviously within our purview. And I think you all knew that at the time.
Yeah,
It's
we
not,
knew
that's
that.
not a surprise. But I've raised the issue with the governor's office, as well as talked to the Department of Agriculture leadership, and so we're looking at some options. And just to mention to you that there was a lot of legislative interest in the current compensation program, and the Department of Agriculture did compile a significant amount of information for legislators about the program, which they're going to provide, if not to us, or if not to you all, to us and you. So more to come on that, but and the issue's been raised. So
Okay.
And Chair, I'll make one last comment about the internal audit. A lot of what goes on, you have a number of members of the internal audit committee, staff from across the board at ODF&W. There's some external people that are also sharing on those meetings. They are generally done on telecom, so it requires time, but not a lot of travel. My position on it has been listening to the various things. Sometimes I felt we've moved into there have been people asking for audits that to me were clearly under the purview of management decisions, and we should change management action, not audit. But there are other items, and my position has been, in my tenure, that something that requires an internal audit is an issue that if it shows up on the front page of the Oregonian and the people are asking, why in the hell wasn't somebody looking at that? If it falls into that category, we probably should have done an internal audit to find out what we should look into it. So those are the kind of decisions that you make, that the internal audit committee makes, and then monitoring progress on internal audits, both ones we conduct and that are done by other agencies. The feds might call for an internal audit of how we're spending money they've given to us. So it is a great look into the dark belly of the beast of ODF&W, which it will be educational to whoever takes it on. Mary.
You didn't sell it, but
No, we also need at least one more member on the PRC too.
okay, we'll get to that. Well, before I close this meeting, I just want to say, Bruce, on behalf of even some of your colleagues that aren't here today, how much we all enjoyed working with you. And I'm really sad that politics raised its ugly head and deprived us of a thinking, caring individual. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
So thank you, Bruce. And with that, we're out of here.
Lynn.
Oh, except for
Marie.
all